I would like to say, if this goes on, and perhaps if the connection breaks down, you can all raise your hands once again if you can't hear me, because I can only see you, I can't hear you at the moment. So I would just firstly like to say congratulations to Tom Finger and a very important talk that he gave. Of course, well made and politic, but I think there are nuggets in there that are quite important to understand. I was involved in 2007 and 2008 at looking at what was happening to Iran. Now, from that process, I'm fully aware of some of the pressures that were on Tom. A lot of people did a lot of good work. Perhaps the most important was Tom Finger's in trying to correct the movement towards war with Iran based on lies. And it is incredible to think back at those times that it was only in 2003 where the worst modern deception of the Western world occurred, where we went to a war in Iraq based on lies in 2003, and over 100,000 people were killed and millions of Iraqi refugees displaced as a result. Just 3 years later, the drums for war with Iran were being whipped up, not just in the United States, but also in this country. And it's thanks to journalists like Cy Hirsch and professional, truthful insiders like Tom and our sources and the sources for journalists that war hasn't happened yet. For example, in the beginning of 2008, we published Iraq's classified rules of engagement for the US Army. In those rules, there was a section that was apparently designed, or at least permitted, for a border skirmish to start up, permitted US troops to go into Iran under a variety of circumstances. And at the time, there were disputes in the Gulf with ships approaching one another, a very heated moment, and the US mainstream media and the White House ramping up any little small incident. One of our sources provided us with those classified rules of engagement. We published them in a deal that we set up with the New York Times to get greater impact for it. And as a result, the Iranian government held a press conference and said, don't you dare come over into our territory like that. We then got hold of the next edition of these classified rules of engagement, and that part had been removed from it. The procedures had been tightened up. If we look back in the history of war, something between 20 and 50% of all wars have started as a result of these border skirmishes. That source has never been revealed. I assume that he or she is happy to have contributed to history and to human rights in that way, and he goes about his business. As opposed to what is sometimes put about, WikiLeaks is not an organization that hates intelligence agencies. Far from it. At its very base, the idea of intelligence is an optimistic one. It's that one can understand the world, one can apply intelligence to understand. The problem is the corruption of those agencies, and that corruption comes about because of secrecy. So when Tom spoke about, in somewhat glowing terms, the improved process that he put down, and I believe him that that is a significant improvement from what was there before, it all rests upon one thing. It rests upon the abilities of people in those agencies to get out information to the public when those processes are not followed. We might have depoliticized analysts working in intelligence agencies who are, to all intents and purposes, mere robots. Perfect machines with perfect accuracy. They are tasked they engage in the tasks, they analyse, they pass up the information higher up the food chain. And what if, in Tom's case, for example, his national intelligence estimate, there was not a threat that it would be released, because our sources say that in fact the White House knew that if it did not release a version, immediately another version would be released, and the White House would have to get, would be then coming second, and its opponents would have their spin on it. So the White House wanted to get their spin on it first. It's only through this pressure of producing analytical product to the public that these sorts of agencies are kept honest and don't become simply robots that are in effect, perhaps it's drawing the bow too far, but some kind of Hitler's willing executioners, mere people who act as robots, who are told to carry out a task and do it. That is not enough. It is not enough to agree to carry out a task for superiors. That is the Nuremberg defense. We must all look to ourselves and understand whether what we are doing is right and just, not just according to the views of our superiors, but according to the long view of history, according to human rights and to our feelings of compassion, if we have any. Now, the war for the push to a war with Iran is far from over. The push for a war with Iran is far from over, and the debate now is occurring in the public sphere as well as in in various manoeuvres by different intelligence agencies, the machinations that are happening in Syria and so on. Now I want to look at some of those. Our cables revealed, for example, that this country, the United Kingdom, engaged in a conspiracy to kill off Press TV, the Iranian state TV station, the Iranian equivalent to the BBC, from being able to broadcast into the United Kingdom. They cut off its satellite feed, which is one of the Sky satellites to this country, the death penalty, effectively, for a national broadcaster. What does that mean? Well, it means that the Iranian government can't get out its view. Iran is surrounded by 45 military bases that are hostile to it on every side. There is no border that Iran does not have that is not already hostile or will probably shortly become so. That produces an atmosphere of intense fear. It produces an atmosphere where they think that there is a war. And as a result, we all know that Great Britain in World War I imprisoned Bertrand Russell, for example, and in World War II there were similar abuses. The Iran fears means that the sort of human rights abuses that we claim about, the human rights abuses that are correctly looked into in Iran, have very little chance of resolution because the leadership of that country is so terrified about being invaded. Now, I want to draw this back to something that is personal to us and personal to WikiLeaks. The internet has become the most important device for revealing the truth, at least since the beginning of the printing press. It has become the #1 antidote to TV. Democracies are always lied into war. The Iraq War was a result of lies. The increase in involvement in the United States in Vietnam was a result of the Gulf of Tonkin incident, another lie. It's not just lies by intelligence analysts, it's lies by the big media machine. And what is in the big media machine? Well, it's the various institutions that get too comfortable and too close to the table of power, the very table that they are meant to be reporting on and policing and getting into the historic record. When Tom spoke about process and removing political bias from analysts, there is also cultural bias. What is the cultural wind and is culturally accepted? That also flows into analysts. Now, producing cultural bias is something that we must watch more closely. It's not just about what facts are reported on the BBC News. Those are important. But there are mechanisms of propaganda which go under the surface. They're not direct factual claims, and those are things like Hollywood movies. Now, I've seen this directly when we looked at intelligence reports at a low level coming out from Iraq in 2003, reporting what was happening there with the Badr Corps or Sikri or Iranian influence. The full package of cultural bias that exists in the United States for people who are not properly educated in assessing what they're understanding came with them. Eventually, those reports and analysts did learn more about what was happening, and by the middle of 2003 were, in fact, sometimes passing up true reports of what was happening, that there is going to be a sectarian crisis in this country. That was known by Marines G2 intelligence, for instance, halfway through 2003. Completely denied by the political leadership. So it's not enough to produce accurate reporting because if political leadership won't let it out, what are you going to do? No, analysts must be responsible, not to political leadership. Analysts must be responsible to the public, and they must be responsible to the historical record. Now, we have something here, which is a recent acquisition of WikiLeaks, although we've been following the matter for some time. And this is the script to a tens of millions of dollar budget DreamWorks movie. What is it about? It is about us, nominally. It is about WikiLeaks, the organization. It is a mass propaganda attack against WikiLeaks, the organization, and the character of my staff and our activities and so on. But it is not just an attack against us. It is an attack against Iran. It fans the flames to start a war with Iran. And it's coming out in November. It's being filmed now. Benedict Cumberbatch is playing me. This movie has British involvement, and people in Britain should be concerned about it. How does it open? Well, and this has not been previously disclosed before, the opening scene is in a military complex in Tehran. The camera comes in, closes up on a file, and it is a design for a nuclear bomb marked with nuclear symbols. There's notes and whispers all around, and they're in Farsi, they're in Persian. There's an older scientist speaking. A high-speed camera will measure the explosive charge we've designed to trigger the chain reaction. It is then revealed by the camera 4 scientists in white coats walking in a windowless corridor. The youngest, Simsana, remember that name, Simsana, writes on the file, "The dimensions of the payload are consistent with a Shabab missile." Okay, that's the opening scene. Iran is working on an atomic weapon. The opening scene of a film about WikiLeaks. How does this have anything to do with us? Well, we'll come to it. The next scene concerning Iran is in Cairo, where that Iranian nuclear scientist is meeting a US CIA agent, Kate. Close up again on the handwritten diagram of a nuclear bomb, the same diagram as we saw in the opening. And Saman says, I copied it from memory. I copied it from memory. They're testing the explosive in the next 6 months. Now remember what Tom's National Intelligence Estimate found. Iran did not have a nuclear program. All 16 US intelligence agencies feeding into that report said that was the case with high confidence and has been reconfirmed every year since that point. The senior diplomat, who's also at the table with the CIA agent, says, "Shit, we thought they were at least 3 years away from a bomb." Another lie. Tom's report does not say that they're 3 years away from a nuclear bomb. So it's a lie upon a lie, a great big budget thing that's going to be pushed out in November. The Iranian nuclear scientist then says, if it works, they won't hesitate to sell the technology. And even if one of these things, if it works, they won't hesitate to sell the technology. And even if one of these things gets into the wrong hands, they'll sell it anyway. So that's the reality of where we're at. Not merely a war of intelligence agencies, but a war of corrupt media, corrupt culture. That war, we have got to understand. People who have appeared on this panel have been involved, sometimes with great sacrifice, at revealing the truth about important parts of the world, how the world is unfolding, how the world is shaping, the nature of institutions. They have revealed it heroically, in many cases, to the historical record, to our civilization as a whole, to you. You have to understand that where there's great powers at work, I don't mean shadow conspiracies, I mean enormous cultural powers, enormous industrial powers, the vast network of corporations that interact with government agencies around the world, selling them products, shipping their logistics from one place to another. The National Security Agency, for example, now has approximately 70% of its expenditure pass through Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, etc. This produces a lobby that pushes in particular directions. How is it that such a lie got into a script about WikiLeaks? How is it that in the light of that national intelligence estimate that anyone could think that it was tolerable, acceptable to foist that lie upon the public, that it would make it all the way through the Hollywood system, that distributors would pick it up? Because they perceive that that is where the power lies in the United States. They perceive that it's perfectly okay to slander an entire nation, that it's perfectly okay to beat the drums of war like that, because people in that system want the war. They want it. We have to understand that everything that we see, read, and hear is produced for a purpose. It's produced as a result of incentives. Other material is not produced. There are disincentives to not produce it. We walk almost sleepwalking, almost blind every time we open the newspaper and read an article. That particular journalist wrote about that for a particular reason. They felt that their editor would accept that. They wouldn't have to argue with them. The editor felt that the proprietor would accept it. The journalist felt that the people that they deal with in their community would like it, and in fact might even pat them on the head and take them to a fancier cocktail party, or perhaps even give them a better position in Oxford. All these things influence how our society, our civilization is documented. Now, working against that trend and against that current of corrupt, powerful organizations producing a distorted perspective of the world has been the internet. For the first time in history, that has allowed one person with some truth to speak to every single person who wants to hear that truth. It is the great antidote. There is a war on for control of the internet. That war takes place on the one hand by producing incredible propaganda and hyping up threats about how the internet is dangerous. On the other hand, it involves introducing mass surveillance systems to surveil all of the internet. Different countries see the effects being brought by the internet and the political liberations being brought by the internet. And powerful groups in those countries feel fearful and they feel destabilized. And as a result, they want to find some way to control it and to know it. The knowing part of it comes from surveilling every trans-border communication that occurs between Great Britain and the United States, between almost every country in Latin America and the rest of the world, because their communications have to pass through the United States to reach Europe, pass through the United States to reach Asia, and sometimes even pass through the United States when one Latin American country talks to another, simply because the communications infrastructure has been passed that way. This is collectively the greatest transfer of wealth that has ever happened, the greatest theft of information that has ever happened from every single one of us who uses the internet into the bowels of secret agencies. Now, if those secret agencies were working on our behalf, perhaps we could accept it. If, as soon as possible, that material would enter into the historical record, would enter into the record of our civilization, where we could all individually make decisions using that information to produce a better, more harmonious world, then perhaps it would be tolerable. But it is not tolerable in its current form. And so it is up to decent people, good people, still working inside of government, inside of private contractors that are engaged in these sorts of behaviours, to get it out to the public, to get it into the historical record, either by doing it anonymously, which is of course what we favour. Stay in there 30 years, work with us for 30 years getting out this sort of information, or by going public and standing up and fighting to describe the truth of what they've seen. Thank you.
Intelligence contradicts that, in fact, the Russians tried to influence the elections and this hacked information came from them, and you're saying that is outright false. That's a falsehood.
Our source is not the Russian government.
So, in other words, let me be clear. Russia did not give you the Podesta documents or anything from the DNC.
That's correct.
Can you confirm whether or not you have information involving hacked info from the RNC?
We received about 3 pages of information to do with the RNC and Trump, but it was already public somewhere else.
Okay, so in other words, there was nothing significant. There was nothing comparable to what happened. So what Reince Priebus said on NBC to Chuck Todd this weekend was true, and NBC had it wrong.
Well, as far as we're aware of.
As far as you're aware of.
Yeah.
Now, the CIA supposedly says the Russians definitely tried to influence the U.S. election. What is your thoughts on that?
I think it's very interesting. The key quote for us is from James Clapper on the 17th of November. James Clapper is the head of the DNI. He's the Director of National Intelligence, who oversees all 17 U.S. intelligence agencies. And so his statement is, as far as the WikiLeaks connection, this is made to the House Intelligence Committee, as far as the WikiLeaks connection, the evidence is not strong, and we don't have a good insight into the sequencing of the releases or when the data may have been provided. We don't have good insight into that. So
let me, for the sake of our audience, Julian, let me play the exact quote. This is James Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence, saying exactly what you did, that in fact the Russian government, well, to what he exactly said, that in fact he was very, very clear in saying that WikiLeaks' connection with Russian hacking is not strong. Watch.
As far as the WikiLeaks connection, the evidence there is not as strong, and we don't have good insight into the sequencing of the releases or when the data may have been provided. We don't have as good insight into that.
So that confirms exactly what you're saying. Can you answer whether or not there's a report out today, and there was a report out earlier this week, that, in fact, they can trace back some leaks to the Department of Homeland Security as it relates to the state of Georgia? Do you know anything about those?
I looked when look, let's pull back a bit. There's a deliberate attempt this week to conflate a whole lot of different issues together. It seems to be as a desire, an extremely dangerous and foolish desire to flip members of the U.S. Electoral College around into getting up John Kasich or Hillary Clinton on the 19th. Mm-hmm. It's foolish because it won't happen. It's dangerous because the argument that it should happen can be used in 4 years' time or 8 years' time for a sitting government that doesn't want to hand over power. And that's a very dangerous thing. There's Clinton-aligned PACs putting out ads with lots of celebrities trying to push these electors to do it. So how are they rhetorically going about it? Well, there's our publications that did make significant influence during the election. Lots and lots of Americans took them up, read them, analyzed them, forwarded them to each other. It was the most discussed topic, according to Facebook, throughout October. Okay, but then we have U.S. intelligence intelligence saying they don't know how we got our stuff or when we got it, and us saying we didn't get it from a state. Then there's hacking of various systems that have occurred. Okay, presumably to get intelligence. The Israelis do it, the Russians do it, the Chinese do it, the French do it every year and every election cycle to understand what policies are. So it's no surprise at all that there's record of Russians or others hacking a lot of these systems. That's
let me put the question.
Intelligence collection.
Let me put this a different way. The state of Georgia in the United States, the Secretary of State there now confirms 10 separate cyber attacks on its network that were all traced back to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security addresses. Do you know anything about that?
I don't know about this specific case, but the state hacking I do know about because I followed it when it first came up in the original FBI report. Look, these are about election voter registration systems, not vote counting systems.
Right.
It seems to be just basic identity theft. If you read what DHS said at the time, it said that it looked like these were going to be sold online in black markets. Is the FSB going to be selling voter registration records online in black markets? No, of course. It's almost overwhelmingly likely that it is just identity theft.
Let me ask you this.
As far as the DHS attacks are concerned, that could be a number of things. It could be the DHS just testing security, and then people using the logs of those tests, or rather misusing them to try and claim that there's been attempted hacks of these systems.
Well, I certainly respect, and by the way, it is important to point out some of your history. When you were 16 years old, you did hack into NASA. You did hack into the Department of Defense, and I believe one other agency. Is that true?
There's a number of books saying that.
Okay. So there's a pretty good chance it might be true.
I've never been charged for that. I would like to keep it that way.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe the statute of limitations has moved on.
I think it has, actually.
I have said that there are two things that America needs to take from you and some of these other high-profile cases, and one is there's proof positive that we don't really have cybersecurity at a level we need for a country that is so actively involved in intelligence and influencing world events, etc. So you've done us a favor, because now we could fix the problem if we so desired, but in all the years President Obama's been in office, he did nothing to fix it. The second thing that I think you did for America, which I think is very important, is you exposed how corrupt our government is, and I'll get to that in a second. Without revealing your sources, would it be fair to say that the information as it relates to WikiLeaks and John Podesta's emails came from within the United States to you?
We have said it has not come from a state party. We know where it came from originally, of course. It's John Podesta, it's from the DNC, etc. There's been no claim that has been held up, it's not even maintained anymore, that any of the information has been modified or is fake.
So you can't confirm or deny if this information came from within the United States?
We're unhappy that we felt that we needed to even say that it wasn't a state party. Normally we say nothing at all. But we have a conflict of interest. We have an excellent reputation and strong interest in protecting our sources, and so never saying anything about them, never ruling anyone in or anyone out. We sometimes do it. We don't like to do it. We have another interest, which is maximizing the impact of our publications.
Let me ask you this then.
So here, in order to prevent a distraction attack against our publications, we've had to come out and say, no, it's not a state party. Stop trying to distract in that way. Pay attention to the content of the publication.
So in other words, when you say state party, it wasn't another state like Russia or some other country.
Correct.
Let me ask you about WikiLeaks, and I think this could shake up the political world. Is it true, an email sent in July of this year that you have that describes how funds could be diverted from the Clinton campaign to the super PACs of Jeb Bush, Carly Fiorina, and John Kasich, specifically document number 1078645, and it reads, JBCFJK PACs will be noticeably silent for the rest of the campaign. Each will receive a significant allowance from advertising budget. HRC, Hillary is in the loop and talked to all three personally, eyes only. Is that a legitimate?
I don't have that in front of me. We have published nearly 100,000 documents. So, I mean, I have seen references to things like that. I don't recall seeing an eyes only phrase.
Do you recall any quid pro quo as it relates to Senator Lindsey Graham that he would get some assistance merely, in other words, when he ran for re-election for the Senate, I believe, in 2020?
I don't know. Lindsey Graham is in the Podesta emails.
Yes. All right. Well, that's something that maybe hopefully over time we'd be able to follow up on. on. I have so many more questions for you. Let me ask you a couple of these. Do you think the president knows, as you do, that the source was not Russia for WikiLeaks? And I think it's important to point out that for over 10 years, WikiLeaks has never been proven wrong, not one single time. Do you believe the president is purposefully advancing this for political purposes to delegitimize Donald Trump?
Yes. It's clear if you look at the statements by James Clapper. He also made an earlier statement that the U.S. intelligence is not aware of when we received material or how. So it's pretty clear that he must be getting those briefings as well if the public is getting them. So there's a deliberate attempt to conflate. Basically, as far as the public is concerned, the only interesting thing that happened is that WikiLeaks published a number of different types of information, the DNC publications, John Podesta's, and a variety of Clinton emails obtained under Freedom of Information Act. So that's what's interesting to the public.
By the way, it would not be the first time the CIA was politicized. You might remember during the Benghazi case, I actually spent time on this program talking to the people that were there on the ground while the attack was going on. The American people were told a very different story, that this was, quote, a spontaneous demonstration related to a YouTube video. And I just don't know many demonstrations that are spontaneous where they happen to have in their back pocket RPGs and mortar rounds, which were fired at the consulate and the compound.
That's false. And our publications show that Hillary Clinton knew it's false. There's a letter from Hillary Clinton to Chelsea Clinton.
Yes.
Chelsea Clinton uses an assumed name, Diane Reynolds, and that's the day after the attack, where she says, in fact, it was a
Well, my point was, though,
group.
The CIA advanced that false story that it was a spontaneous demonstration when we now know it was a terrorist attack. And they advanced it through the CIA in Langley. There were some people there that were playing politics at the CIA, advancing a false narrative, a story that we know is false. All right, Julian, if you can, just stay right there. We'll come back. We'll continue more with Julian Assange and his insight as the founder and director of WikiLeaks, and more as the Sean Hannity Show continues.
The information you need.
All right, as we roll along now, 25 till the top of the hour, as we continue our interview with WikiLeaks founder and director, Julian Assange. Let me ask you this. You never thought Donald Trump would win. Why?
I didn't think he would win. I thought he had a much higher chance than what the polling was giving. I'd gone through Brexit. And there's a very similar case in Brexit where you had a new nationalist feeling in the country and disenfranchisement with existing elites. But there was polling, a number of professional pollsters coming up to Brexit, and they got it wrong because people misled the pollsters in two different ways. And to be frank, some of the pollsters also wanted to be misled. But so those people who were going to vote against Brexit said that they were going to vote for it, and those people who were going to vote for it said they're going to vote against it. The same thing happened, it seems, in the case of Donald Trump's election. So why is that? There was intense pressure in the United States from the mainstream media to make people feel ashamed of wanting to vote for Donald Trump, and to make them feel like that they had to vote for Hillary Clinton even though they didn't want to. And actually, I think it's this second case of Hillary Clinton supporters falsely telling pollsters that they would vote for her and then not doing it that made the difference in the election. So I had assumed that these pollsters had seen the Brexit situation and had taken that into account. They said that they had taken it into account, and that was not true. Now, very interestingly, I think that if the polling had been accurate, Donald Trump wouldn't have won.
Interesting.
Now, why do I say that? Well, Hillary Clinton's campaign outspent Donald Trump by almost 2-1. If the polling had been accurate, bankers and other cashed-up interests would have given Hillary Clinton, another $5 billion. And she would have blasted that in advertising everywhere. But they didn't give her all that money because they didn't perceive that there was a need to, because she seemed that she was 4 or 5 points ahead in the polls. So they got fooled by the polling and therefore didn't spend the amount of money that they needed to on their campaign and didn't recruit other resources. So, recruit even more mainstream media resources to beat up Trump and to defend Clinton because they didn't think there was a need to.
Let me ask you remember when the New York Times was going full throttle with the story about Donald Trump's taxes, which was stolen information at the time, and everybody in the media thought it was fair and it was legitimate coverage, and how they got a hold of it was not an issue in any way. You view yourself and you view WikiLeaks the same way. You view yourself as a journalist. Information came to you, and you disseminated that information because you felt the public had a right to know. What is the difference between what you and WikiLeaks have done versus what the New York Times and CNN does when they publish Donald Trump's taxes that were received illegally or received?
There is a difference. Our stuff has more impact.
Well, that's a good. Okay, I touche. I can't disagree with that. Yeah, very good point. But in other words, you do view WikiLeaks. One of the things in the conversations that I've had with you both on radio and TV is how important it is for you to maintain a perfect record and not get anything wrong in terms of the information that you acquire, that you release. You want it to be right, and so far you've been right every time.
So far we've been right since we were founded a decade ago. Yeah, it's a very valuable thing to have that perfect record. It's also a curse because we have to work so hard to keep it.
Understood. And my big fear 10 years ago, which you and I discussed the last time you were on my radio show, when I wanted you arrested, I said, because I felt you would release potential information that would result in methods and people potentially dying because there is so much in terms of covert operations, people working undercover. You purposely choose not to publish that information, correct?
Well, yes. If you're talking about Afghanistan, there were 15,000 documents that we didn't release in the
because you thought people's lives would be in jeopardy immediately.
No, but we thought that there was a reasonable possibility, so that we wanted to study the issue further. So we didn't think that people's lives would definitely be in jeopardy, but we weren't sure, so we wanted to hold things back till we understood it.
Yeah. All right. I have a lot more questions for you. Let me ask you a few of these because I think this is very important for our audience to fully, completely grasp and to understand. So you only had 3 pages on the RNC. Do you think the media in the U.S. is trying to scapegoat you, and what message do you have for them? That, in fact, the Russians...
They're increasingly not very important.
So true.
I think Trump has even made this statement. I mean, they're a paper tiger in this election, and the new publications on the internet, one can get pretty directly to the people. So these old press are less important. And the degree of bias they've been showing during the electoral process, and it has come from both sides, but I suppose particularly the liberal press, readers see that. They feel it. They don't like being lectured to or told what to do, and they rebel against it. I think this is the other reason why Trump won that no one's speaking about, which is that kind of hectoring from the liberal media in the United States and the type of advertising that Hillary Clinton was putting out really turned people off, because it seemed like those people who already had a lot of social power were telling you what to do, and so you wanted to do the opposite.
How easy, from your assessment, as somebody that has been involved in this most of his adult life now, how secure, if you were to give a grade of 1 to 10, 10 being the most secure, how secure is America's agencies, American government, America's secrets?
Everything is almost completely insecure now. The computer systems have become so complex that it is not possible to understand all the parts, let alone secure them. It is just impossible.
So, and that goes for individuals as well as the government?
It goes for all of us, yeah.
Yeah. Do you think there could be a separate operation within the Russian government, separate and apart from the information you have at WikiLeaks?
Okay, so this is interesting. There's a conflation between the three things. WikiLeaks publications, and I've told you what James Clapper says about them, that they can't see how the Russians transfer them to us, etc., that had the impact everyone's talking about. Alleged hacks of the U.S. voting system. You just mentioned the DHS, for example, and other publications appearing on the internet that basically almost no one has heard of. They didn't have any impact in the election. In fact, might have had the opposite impact. So in this last category, there's a site called DC Leaks and a WordPress site run by a guy calling himself Guccifer 2. Now, who are behind these, we don't know.
Do you know these people?
And there was a couple of publications also by The Hill and by Gawker and The Smoking Gun that claimed that their documents came from, I think, from Guccifer, maybe this DC Leaks. So those look very much like that they're the Russians, but in some ways they seem very amateur, and they look too much like it. Mm-hmm. And so this is what, far from me to quote John Bolton, who I think should be executed or something, but he has said correctly that if something looks so much like that it is meant to be the Russians, then maybe someone wants you.
Just think that's such a good point. Let me ask you about Craig Murray, former British ambassador to Uzbekistan, an associate of yours. He was quoted in the Daily Mail that he flew to Washington, D.C. for the emails. He claimed he had a clandestine handoff in a wooded area near American University with one of the email sources, and the leaker's motivation was, quote, disgust at the corruption of the Clinton Foundation and the tilting of the primary election playing field against Bernie Sanders, and he said the source had legal access to the information. The documents came from inside leaks, not from hacks.
Yeah, we don't comment on sourcing. Craig Murray is a former UK ambassador. He is a friend of mine. He is not authorized to speak on behalf of WikiLeaks.
Are you angry that he gave this interview?
I just don't want to go anywhere near that.
Okay, that's fine. But can I ask the question in a roundabout way without being annoying? I'm not trying to be annoying here. Is it much more likely that would have happened versus the Russians?
I don't want to be drawn on this.
Okay.
We have to protect our sources.
Understood.
So I can't be drawn on it.
Okay, when were you first alerted that someone had hacked these documents of Podesta?
That's an interesting question. Trying to cast my mind back. They took a while to prepare. So did the DNC leaks. So do other publications. It's quite a lot of work, verifying them, formatting them, indexing them, understanding them. But for the same reason of making it hard for authorities to track when our sources have communicated with us, we don't like to mention precisely when we've obtained things.
Yeah, so there really is no evidence at all, and everyone's saying that the Russians has done this. Let me ask you whether, in the Manning case, was that a Russian attempt at undermining the Bush presidency with, war logs giving liberals what they needed to erode in terms of the GOP and support and pave maybe the way for Barack Obama to win an election?
Well, we're such sticklers for this kind of thing. We've never said that Chelsea Manning is one of our sources. At trial, they have said that they are. But even if someone is arrested and convicted, and even if they were to plead guilty, we still don't say whether they're one of our sources or not, because someone in such a situation is under some kind of form of duress.
Let me ask you one last question for those, especially in the media, that will pick up.
There were no allegations at his trial that he was working for the Russians.
Let me ask you a question about your motivation, because in a private conversation we once had, without divulging the nature of that conversation, you said to me, I am a journalist. I get information that you think the public needs to know. You said to me you have no interest in information about private citizens, for example.
Yes.
And that you think what you have discovered exposes, for example, I think if there were any good reporters in America, they would have taken the WikiLeaks information that I put up on a TV screen every night and I read on my radio program on 550 stations every day, and they would have taken the issue of how corrupt our media is, how corrupt the Clintons were, and they would have made this would have been a case bigger than Watergate. But for whatever reason, they've gone into this mode where they don't claim you're a journalist, that you're a traitor, and that divulging this information was only political. but I do believe if it was a Republican, they would have been singing your praises day and night. What do you want Americans to know about what your motives are?
Well, WikiLeaks has been going for 10 years. We specialize in obtaining information which has been suppressed from the public that is of political or historical importance, understanding it, analyzing it, publishing it, protecting our sources, encouraging interaction with the public. And that educates everyone, and they can decide how they want to live their lives accordingly. And we've won a lot of awards for that, a lot of journalism awards. I've won the equivalent of the Pulitzer Prize in my own country, Australia, the Walkley Award.
Sure.
Our other journalists have won the top journalism prize in their country three times, in the case of Kristen Frapson. So we're pretty good at this. We have a perfect record.
No, I think you're pretty good.
We have a pretty big impact, as you will have seen.
I think you had a huge impact on this election, and it angers Democrats. Would you have published the same thing if it was about Donald Trump?
Absolutely. Yeah, no problem doing that. And presume, if Donald Trump makes a lot of enemies on the inside in his time in office, then he could well face the same thing in 4 years' time.
By the way, that is the best indication that this did not come from the Russians. I don't think you meant to say that. But listen, Julian, I do appreciate your time. I do think you had an impact, but I do think we got to see a glimpse of how corrupt the nature, the institutions of American government and our political system are. It's actually frightening to me.
It is frightening. I think I love our publications. They're so rich, and you can get a very direct understanding of the power networks that exist in D.C. and with the media and so on. At the same time, yes, they're disturbing. But once you know what's going on, then you can do something about it.
And that was my argument about why I think America owes you a debt of gratitude for that and for the exposing that we have no cybersecurity. Julian, I've taken way too much of your time. Thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it. We hope you'll come on TV soon.
Thanks, Sean. Bye-bye. Take care.
800-941-SEAN, our toll-free telephone number.